Okay. My name, Kirsten Schlewitz, and I'm welcoming you to April's Taste of Peace webinar hosted by Peace Catalyst International, which I am a part of as an educator, digital activist, a lot of times in the chronic illness awareness space, but also obviously in the ecological space. And I will be introducing you today to the idea of ecological peace building. It's something that I'm developing and in the process of sharing the word about. So this will mostly be in the form of a presentation, talk you through a bit about where the world is at, about where the Christian stories tell us about how we are meant to interact with the world and how or if we should change those stories. And then we'll close with hopeful notes on concrete action that you might want to take. Some of you might already know about Peace Catalyst or even be part of it, but this organization will be new to others. So before I get started on my presentation, I'm going to introduce you briefly to the organization. Peace Catalyst is a Christian peace-building organization. We dream of a world where neighbors know and care for each other so we can all flourish together. We can all thrive together as a community. As followers of Jesus, we especially believe the church has a role to play in working with others all over the world so all people can thrive. But we also know that the church often fails to do this, too often causing more harm than good. This is where Peace Catalyst comes in. We direct our work toward Christians to equip and mobilize them to partner with larger communities and across divisions to work for the good of all. If Peace Catalyst sounds like something that interests you, we have team members in all different parts of the world. As I said, I am in Europe, I'm in Montenegro on the coast, but we're all over. You can see on that map there a little bit. And there are tons of ways you can get involved. We would love to build peace alongside you. And so, whether you're here to learn, whether you want to build peace with us, or to support our work, you can find a variety of ways to get involved on our website, peacecatalyst.org. Um, so, we are going to start with the basics. This is how Peace Catalyst defines peace building. It is a process that aims to non-violently transform the relationships and cultural and social conditions that generate destructive and violent conflict. So, this is something new. What is ecological peace building? First note, I've changed that watermark up there. Peace Catalyst does not take any responsibility for this. It's my own definition, and it's still a work in progress. So I welcome all feedback on this. My current working definition, as you'll see here, ecological peace building is the acknowledgement that humans have committed violence against the earth and continue to do so. Therefore, we pledge ourselves to work toward planetary restoration, transforming our relationship with the world around us to create a connected community in which all parts of the ecological system are able to flourish. So, I wanted to say why I decided to come up with an entirely new phrase for something that so many seem to be working toward already. Um, a lot of times when I hear climate change, it feels like something too big to tackle. It's too abstract. You might not actually think about it as the world we're standing on, or the rivers and lakes and seas, that anything but the air and the rising temperatures. Creation care. Sometimes that makes it seem like something only we humans are in control and in charge of imposing on the rest of creation. But a significant element of peace building is working with our neighbors rather than imposing solutions without listening to them. And I think it's crucial that we, especially those of us in developed countries and who are in positions of privilege, who are part of a legacy of colonialism, we need to acknowledge that environmental degradation is, in fact, violence. So, with this definition of ecological, with the definition of peace building generally in mind, I came up with this one to define ecological peace building. And as I said, feel free to give feedback at any point. Now, why ecological peace building? These photos do offer some clues, but I want to know, why are you worried about climate change or environmental destruction? You can go ahead and drop that in the chat if you'd like. Um, I think right now in this time of crisis, it can be difficult to concentrate our energies on the ecological impacts when there are so many things that are demanding our attention. Things like the war in Iran, we might feel like we need to pour all of our attention and energy into ending that immediately, or the mass atrocities occurring in Palestine, Sudan, the Congo. Russia's still attacking Ukraine. Racism, sexism, LGBTQIA plus rights, all of the isms putting people's life in danger. We see that regularly. We're affected by it. The rise of authoritarianism, that continued widening gap between the rich, the extremely rich billionaires, and those just trying to get by. All of those things demand our attention. But not only are environmental issues either tied up in those things, like, you know, the need for oil, or they will make human suffering even worse, like droughts causing further food scarcity in Sudan. Um, so the climate crisis in and of itself, though, is also having a more immediate impact than we might think. So,
Uh, we have a response from Tiffany, and she says it's important to her. Uh, and please correct me if I get anybody's pronouns wrong. Uh, they say it brings awareness to the peace needed for creation and also recognizes violence caused by lack of natural resources.
that's great. Tiffany can step in and do some of this presentation for me. We'll be talking a lot about that sort of thing. So, now, why immediately we are going to be focusing on the climate crisis is some of these fun facts here. Some people call this climate catastrophe and they call it the new normal, but really, it's not our new normal, it's only the beginning. The world has warmed about 2.6 Fahrenheit or 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. And the rate of warming over the past 40 years has drastically increased. And that puts us actually in an age of emergency. And those numbers to me are so difficult to imagine this hotter world, what it does. But we have to try to envision it and we have to try to talk about it. So things like half the world's population being affected by water scarcity, as Tiffany kind of alluded to there, that leads to political turmoil when people are fighting over natural resources. Decreased food supplies, that actually causes rapid depopulation in many parts of the world, particularly right now in tropical areas. And then it will put pressure on other countries as people move. And then along with that, the distribution and rates of tropical diseases, they're increasing, spreading because both human and non-human are finding new places to live. Now, we don't really know what will happen to ecological systems when certain insect populations die off or the coral reefs vanish, but most scientists are pretty sure it's not going to be good. And then rapid inflows of warm water will affect both ecosystems and human livelihoods. I live on a hill right above the sea. That terrifies me to see what will happen as the ice sheets continue to collapse. And all of this is like dominoes. Like one thing collapses, it triggers others, leading to a planet that's extremely inhospitable to life. According to the World Bank, by 2050, more than 200 million people will be displaced internally within their country's own borders and also obviously migrating to other countries with the effects of this climate catastrophe. And without rapid action, 1.2 billion people will be on the move to avoid disaster. So that's a lot. It's a lot more immediate than we think. But unlike those melted glaciers, we're kind of frozen, I think, a lot of the time because this crisis is so immense that it not only seems impossible to make sense of, but impossible to do something about. So I'd like us to take a moment here to breathe. Yeah, we're going to do a little grounding exercise. This is where you can go ahead and turn your camera off if you've got it on, because I want this moment to just be for you to breathe. As you're able, stand or place your feet on the ground. You can even take your shoes off. Now shift your weight from the outside of your foot to the inside of your foot, going nice and slow. Now keep your balance. Now go the other way, inside to outside. Feel what the ground feels like beneath those feet of yours. Take a deep breath in. Shift your weight from the balls of your feet to your toes. Now go back again to your heels. As you return your balance, think about the earth that's beneath those feet of yours, beneath the ground, the soil, the land. With me, take a deep breath in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now out, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to do that again. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 5, 4, 3, two, one. Now out. Six, five, four, three, two, one. One last time. In. Two, three, four. Hold five, four, three, two, one. And out. Six, five, four, three, two, one. I know grounding exercises are becoming increasingly more common in meetings like this, but for me, there's a very good reason. Feel that ground beneath you again. It's still there. As you sit back down, check in with yourself. Has your heart rate slowed a bit after we've talked about those climate catastrophes? Is your breathing a little bit more steady with that soothing, longer out breath? Because such a short, simple exercise that can orient you in the present moment in a specific place, calming you in a way that often is really necessary to help us when we're talking about tough topics like this one. So you can go ahead and turn your videos back on. I like being able to see people's faces and feel like I'm not just talking into the, you know, vast cosmos out there. Obviously, if you're not comfortable, that's totally okay. And we will move along. Hopefully, people are feeling okay. The good news is now we're going to immerse ourselves in ways that we can help with ecological restoration. The way that I'm starting off here might seem a bit slow to you, but I promise there are reasons for it, so stick with me. We are going to examine the stories that we tell ourselves and see if any of those stories need adjusting. The late ecofeminist theologian Sally McFaig also said one of the tasks that theologians have is to suggest alternative interpretations of the God/world relationship. Now, obviously, not going to be time to examine every perspective in the rest of the time that we have here. And especially, we want to get to those practical tips for ecological peace building so that we can all leave here with a little bit of hope. But we're going to touch on some ways we might view Christian stories differently. PCI is a Christian peace building organization. I myself, lifelong Lutheran, fiercely Lutheran, so much of what I say is going to come from that perspective. If you're not identifying as a Christian, please don't run off. I'm not here to convert you. I'd rather show generally how different approaches to the stories we tell ourselves might lead to different outcomes. Often in the West, the Christian worldview is dominant. So the stories that we tell about the earth and why we are here and what we are supposed to do in it do come from there, even those who don't consider themselves Christian. And if you don't consider yourself a Christian, but you do have Christian friends and family, having some of these ideas of how we can change the stories might help you convince them to get involved in ecological peace building and, kickstart their action against this climate catastrophe. So, starting at the beginning, Genesis 1, first creation story. We've come to the part where God is creating humans. God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Now, I want to know, what do you think about when you hear that word dominion? If you have thoughts, drop them in the chat. If your name is the Reverend Dr. Daniel Philip Schlewitz, please do not make it a paragraph long. Just briefly let me know your thoughts when you hear that word dominion. Daniel Cooper Ryder, he says, the story we have been reading and telling about who we are and who God is and what the world is like has proven inadequate, small, and self-destructive. And to me, that's very true when I hear the word dominion, because I think it's like the word that Christians have used to justify the violence that they do upon the earth. And it keeps so many of us from taking real action to restore the planet to a place of flourishing. Now, Tiffany says, no, wait. Yes, Tiffany says, we can sometimes take that term to mean ownership, but I've read other perspectives that give it more of a meaning like kinship. That's fantastic, Tiffany. That's what we are talking about, changing the stories, other perspectives. So, what happens before we come to this point in the creation story? God has created the sky and it was good. God creates the land and the seas, and those are good. God creates the trees and all vegetation and all the stars and the sun, and they are good. And God gives the word that the waters should bring forth sea creatures, and the air should allow birds to fill the skies, and the land should bring forth every type of living thing. God blesses, but the ecosystem is actually putting those things forward. And all of those things are good, even before the humans are made from the dust. So we have also dominion sounds like kings and royalty from Dan. And Michelle says, dominion makes me think of intentional community that governs together and collaboratively. Okay, Michelle might be cheating a little there with that eco-theology background. We're skipping ahead there.
Yeah, I was like, she's gonna be able to tell that I studied this.
Oh, this is what I get for putting questions in the chat. Okay. So, if you'll notice, we started with the humans, but then we went backwards because God doesn't start with the humans. And one of my favorite authors, the Anishinaabe Ukrainian author Patty Krawiec, reminds us that humans are the last to be created. So keep that in mind as we keep talking about that. Could that change the story if humans are last? So, even if humans are last, we're still stuck on that word dominion, which Dan says it's having power over, but also implies responsibility for. Yes, that is true. According to Webster's, dominion, supreme authority, absolute ownership, power, control. And that's what many people think is given to humans in Genesis 1. And if we think about dominion these days, we often think about it this way. We're controlling people or things in whatever way we see fit, be that evil, sometimes good. But, as Michelle has said, it can be an intentional community. that governs together and collaboratively. Or, as the fine theologian Reverend Daniel P. Schlewitz tells me, it is, oh, Emily says that dominion is not about ruling over other people, but having authority over every situation, physical, financial, emotional, and spiritual. That's great. Y'all are far ahead of me on this one. Fine theologians, all of you. Dominion, used in the Old Testament, it's meant as a form of caretaking, and it's especially about protecting the needy and the vulnerable, about living in a balanced relationship, in community, creating God's shalom, that all-encompassing peace that moves us past being okay and into a world that thrives. So if we think about it that way, then it changes the meaning of the creation story. But we can also change the emphasis in which we say God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Sometimes we skip past that part. The image of God, we are created. God blessed them. The Imago Dei. My Latin is awful, please excuse it. But that image of God, that doesn't mean we are being crowned kings and queens, exercising absolute control with no regard for others. We've already discussed that in our discussion of what dominion can mean. Because that's not the sort of God we're talking about. That's another story that we need to get past, is the God on the throne ruling above. This is a God who loves creation, who dwells with creation, blesses all of us. And we also need to remember that the Imago Dei goes hand in hand with Imitatio Dei, imitating God. So we are engaging in that sacred work of creation. God's creation is continuous and ongoing. We are part of it. We push back the darkness as well. We can help the seas and the skies and the earth bring forth life. We participate in the Creator God's holy work. We are given that responsibility when we are created in God's image and blessed. And with that responsibility becomes accountability for our community, accountability for that conduct that we might be ugh, carrying out under the guise of dominion. Okay, so y'all did really well on dominion. Let's see about the different ways in which we think about the way of the cross and the Jesus story. Because for Christians, the ways in which we imitate God, seek to live out our lives in God's image, they are modeled on Jesus typically. But like the creation stories, sometimes the stories about Jesus prove too small, too insufficient to address the violence and destruction that humans are wreaking upon the earth. So I think this is kind of the most basic understanding of the Christian approach to life and death, to what we're supposed to think about Jesus. But of course, once again, I want you to drop into the chat what you think is missing from this story. Just a couple words or a sentence, please. What's missing from this idea of Jesus died on the cross for my sins, but I accept the Lord Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and then I will go to heaven and live with God forever? I mean, some might throw in a few words about needing to be a good person or needing to do good works, trying not to sin. But I think a lot of times for many Christians, we're like having an individual approach to being saved. And we're thinking about what comes after death, life after death, and not about what we can do in life, except maybe try to be decent and maybe save a few other souls. So, yes, Michelle, all I statements. Where is the we? I agree. And yes, Tiffany is agreeing as well. This is very individualistic, and that is definitely a story we need to change, I think. So, this one, much less we, but I also didn't use a lot of pronouns, so maybe that's just a little bit of bias. Um, yes, Barb also says we're missing out on what we can be doing here on earth and in community. So let's look at Jesus in another way. Jesus, God incarnate, but fully human, dwelling in a body amongst the rest of creation. That's very important. Body and community, living, breathing, showing us a model of how God plans to restore creation, which is definitely about intentional community, the we, the bringing in the poor and the vulnerable, disrupting corruption and power to create a different world, a different way of being. Then Jesus sacrifices himself at the hands of those he's trying to show a different way of being in community, taking care of the world. But in the resurrection, Jesus returns as a reminder to all of us that God's promise of restoration continues. So I think it's very important to remember to look at all aspects of the Christian story, not just the death of Jesus on the cross, but incarnation, life, resurrection. And so I hope this one produces kind of a different outcome in our thinking. Because when we think about God coming down in the form of Jesus, it's being part of creation, being part of restoring creation, and bringing us back into relationship with divine. And in this way, it's not the individual, it is the full community coming in, restoring that relationship, setting us all on a path to communal flourishing. That's God's vision. Jesus' death is not for my sins, but for the communal sins of this world. And it's also an invitation for all of us to join in the self-sacrifice that Jesus made. And we have the courage to do that because the resurrection reminds us that death is not the end of the story. God is still here. God is still creating, following through on promises of loving every little bit of creation, welcoming it into relationship. Now, what we don't see in this story is the Holy Spirit. It's because it's very difficult to talk about the Trinity in this short of a presentation, but we need to remember that the Spirit is what helps us to not be those individuals, to not just be I pronouns, but the constant reminder of God with us. The Spirit is gathering us all in and bringing us together. And that's really important because we cannot do this work alone. We need each other for strength to get through, to continue on in fulfilling God's promise of restoring creation, of ecological restoration. I had a little slide about how did we get here, but I think y'all are pretty good about knowing how we got from the I's to the incarnation, life, death, and resurrection. Um, but I do want to say a little bit about, okay, now I went too far. See, y'all are too good and you're throwing me off my game. I just want to reiterate that we're changing these stories because, as Thomas Aquinas said, a mistake about creation is a mistake about God. Now, I'm throwing it out there as a Lutheran. We are meant to sin boldly. And that does not mean that we're meant to just, like I thought for a long time, we can just do whatever we want because God's forgiveness covers it all. It's actually a direction involving our calling. And we'll get to this later. This will make sense later, but this was directed to Luther's colleague and friend, Philip Melanchthon, and I probably pronounced that wrong. But he's saying, when he says sin boldly, we are going to make mistakes, but that doesn't excuse us from doing the work. And in this case, that's finding ways to love and serve creation. But then we go back to this quote. Okay, a mistake about creation is a mistake about God. So I'm a perfectionist. We might have some other perfectionists among us. How can we limit those mistakes? How can we sin boldly and do the work, but also not be spreading the wrong stories? And hopefully, I have a little answer for you. Now we're going back to the Old Testament, to the book of Job. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with this book. I think the one thing that often stands out is so in the book of Job, it's about a very privileged man who's being tested through suffering, loses his health and wealth, family and friends, but he never loses his faith. And that's usually what is preached about or talked about when we talk about the book of Job. But what's interesting to me is that Job argues with God a lot because Job just wants to understand what God is doing and why. And throughout the book, you can see that Job knows that the creatures of the earth are aware of what the Lord is doing and the mysterious ways of the divine. And Job's like, well, why do they get to know? And I don't. I don't understand. Aren't I just as good? Um, and by the time you get to the end of the book, which is a great book actually when it comes to understanding God's perspective of creation and what can be a Christian ecological peace building viewpoint. By the time we get to the end of this book, God is furious because he's God saying, were you there, Job, when I laid down the foundations of the earth, when I calmed and contained the seas? Have you thought about how big the earth is, why the stars are in certain places in the sky? What about the mountain goats, the wild ox, the ostrich, the hawks, the eagles? What do you know about their behaviors? And the answer is nothing, really, for two reasons. Because those creatures do not need us. That's one point. And because Job has never really observed them. So the point there is, whoop, that the earth has things to teach us. At this point, though, the problem is that those creatures back in Job's time that he did not know because they did not need humans, they do need us now. We've seen that back with the statistics on the warming earth and what's going to happen. So, that idea of ecological kinship, which ties in with dominion, a different way of looking at dominion. That requires us to actually pay attention because we have changed the planet's equilibrium. We need to listen. We need to be willing to hear to restore the planet to what it was once like. Now, just very quickly, the Psalms can be a great guide to acknowledging the fact that the earth has things to tell us because they say things like, the heavens are telling the glory of God, but they also say, like, the rivers clap their hands and the skies speak of God's beauty, and the moon and the stars, they're reflecting the divine. Mountains are trembling, hills are shouting. All of this is the earth speaking, but not in ways that we always understand. And so, what do we need to do? And here, this comes to the first step of hands-on things we can do in ecological peace building. Now, we talked about this climate catastrophe, the fact that we are in an age of an emergency. And my first step is asking you to embrace contemplation, which you might think I'm a little crazy for that. But again, we're talking about needing to listen. There's a Hebrew word, teshuvah, turning and returning. When we're stripping ourselves of distraction through prayer and service, we continually, ongoingly, wholeheartedly realign ourselves with the divine. So when we do this, we hear where God is leading us and what creation is telling us, what is needed, how to enter into relationship with other parts of creation. So we have a few ideas here on contemplation as ecological peace building. If you have a contemplation practice you regularly engage in, please go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I'll go through these ones. Obviously, the first, sitting in silence, preferably outside, but by a cracked window will also work because remembering, listening, we're listening actively. Now, for those, my mother particularly, who hate being still, take a walk, but keep your earphones off. Aim for somewhere nearby and try to make this a regular practice because you want to notice things. Notice things like new buds appearing or the coming and going of different types of animals. This might seem a little weird for a contemplative practice, but listening can be hard, so you might want to download an app. Um, my family and I love the Merlin app because it helps us know which birds are talking to you. Doesn't help us know what they're saying exactly, but you know which ones are coming and going and know how to pay attention to them more. PlantNet is similar, but of course, that involves plants. And then there's Stellarium. If you like the night sky, you can just take it outside and it will help you to identify what constellations are above you at certain times of the year. I am a complete weather nerd, so sometimes I keep a weather journal. But even if you're not as nerdy as me, it can be very helpful because keeping that kind of journal will help you pay attention to like cloud formations, temperature changes, wind direction. All of that is ways of listening and hearing, letting the earth speak. Get your hands dirty. Emily, you know this stuff. Turning over soil increases endorphins, helps our mental health, but it also reminds us of the unseen parts of the world that we don't see all the times, like the worms, the insects, and the bugs that we might think are kind of gross, but are extremely necessary to the world around us. And also, they are beloved by God, and we need to pay attention and love them as well. And then the last is establishing a ceremony for the time that you spend listening to, observing, being in nature, because that can really help you acknowledge the importance of being with the other, the non-human life, and the non-living elements of creation that help shape our world. So here's my little um, everyday morning ceremony that just opens me to the world around me. Again, part of my Lutheran heritage, remember your baptism daily. So, beginning my day by pouring fresh water into my pollinator water station, that not only helps the birds and the bees and the butterflies that might need a little extra water, but it helps me to remember the things that we've talked about already. Like, I lost my train of thought there. Please remember it's almost 3 in the morning for me. But it helps me to remember that those birds and the butterflies and the bees and everything that I'm seeing from my balcony in the morning is deserving of love, help, protection, restoration. Even when it's a terrifying beetle flying at my way to get some water in the morning, deserves my protection. It really is a kind of helpful practice, I think. So, we began this part of the discussion with Sally McFay's assertion: the answer to the question of why we are here makes all the difference in how we live on planet Earth. And Paul Tillich, a theologian, reminds us he makes that answer easy. We are here because divine love wants us to be here. And if we are so freaking loved by the divine mystery that keeps us here, even though we mess up again and again, that we hurting one another, inflicting outright violence on other elements of creation. If we're still being kept here, what is that reason? How should we be living on this planet? How should we be living on this planet? In her recent book, Church of the Wild, Victoria Lortz talks about how encountering the particulars of our world invites us into relationship. So, how we were talking about listening and observing, this goes deeper, inviting us into relationship, whether with trees, birds, deer, whatever you are seeing. If you say yes to the relationship, if you show up regularly, you're not just observing and listening, you're entering into a conversation, a back and forth. It will continuously deepen. And then from there, it will spread from one element of creation to another because you're like awakening this spark within us, reshaping us. Your love, your adoration, your respect for what you have been observing and engaging in conversation and relationship will move beyond that specific relationship. And you're building community, kinship with more and more of the entities that surround us, human and non-human, living and non-living. So that's why I'm suggesting beginning your venture into ecological peace building through contemplative practices, because there you'll be able to hear what's being asked of you specifically. You'll be in that conversation. You won't be imposing from the top down, but entering with more knowledge of what you can be doing. So now we will dive into those specific active approaches you can have at hand when you realize what it is you're being called to do as part of restoring the earth. Now, if you have practices that you've heard about a lot when it comes to the ecological crisis, climate change, anything like that, what you're kind of supposed to be doing or what you think you might be doing, should be doing, go ahead and drop those in the chat. I want to first address the fact that you alone are not responsible for the ecological destruction, the emergency that we are in. I hope you know that. And I hope that you on your own will not know that you cannot save the planet, restore it to a place of flourishing. That's why we've been talking about community. So, sorry. Many systems have to change for a true restoration to begin. Food systems, energy usage, work habits, the continued plunder of poorer countries by the wealthies. These things, I want you to keep them in mind, but we're not going to focus there today because I want us to think about action that produces results we can see. Um, I will say this one thing. I do believe rampant consumerism does contribute to many of the issues our planet is facing because the market for consumer goods destroys forests, results in the stripping away of resources and the search for oil and precious metals, puts plastic into our seas, contributes to pollution, and allows power to remain there with the wealthy. So, one thing that you can do is simply ask, do I need this before you purchase something new? Just that one question, do I need rather than do I want? That can make a difference. But for the most part, instead of talking about what you shouldn't do and what you should take away, we're going to talk about a few things you can add to your life to engage in ecological peace building. Because I think seeing the changes we make can give us hope. And hope is needed to make any part of activism sustainable. Speaking of activism and sustainable practices, I cannot recommend micro activism by Omkari Williams enough. It's perfect for people who want to make a difference but aren't sure if they have enough time or if they can even accomplish anything in those few minutes they do have, or how they can direct the focus of those precious few minutes. So, one of the things that I've learned from Williams is that one of the best ways to make your activism sustainable is to pick one, at most two, areas to concentrate on. So maybe you came here today knowing the area you most want to make a difference. Drop it in the chat if so. Maybe you need a few minutes to think, or a few hours, or days, or weeks. I mean, we talked about listening and coming into relationship with creation, so you might not know right now, but just off the top of your head, what you think you might be called to do, what aspect of ecological care you can participate in, just throw it in the chat. I'll just give you an example of me, what I feel called to do, which is living in Montenegro. There you see the Bay of Kotor. That's really reinforced to me that I am about the sea, that's what I want to care for. And so one of the little things I can do is when I go down to the sea, I can take a bag and collect the litter that people leave behind. And interestingly enough, this is one of those micro actions that really bring a lot of people that can really make a big difference because there are studies that show when when litter has been picked up, then fewer people leave litter behind. So that's something that I do put effort into because it does make a difference that you can see kind of week by week. The cleaner that something gets, the cleaner it will stay. And that kind of also comes from when I was a kid, my mom and I used to do beach cleanups every year. Um, and it's an easy way to get community involved as well. Just say that, like, okay, this weekend we are going to have a community beach cleanup or whichever part of the community you're involved in. And people will want to get involved because it's something easy that they can do that you see makes a difference. But also, in terms of the sea, there are other things you can start branching off. Like, I live in an area that's very touristed, and as Montenegro moves into the European Union, it's more about making sure that this stays a town where people can afford to live. So you're thinking about like affordable housing rather than everything going to Airbnb and that type of thing, because tourists tend to not take care of the places that they come to as much. And then you're also thinking about, okay, the streams and the rivers that run into the sea. How can I protect those? What, factories or mining, that kind of thing has to be looked at, or like cruise ships that come into the bay. What can I do about those? So it kind of all branches out from that one thing that you decide to pick. So what have people said here? Um, I am obsessed with consignment, thrifting, recycling. Excellent, Michelle. We are going to get to something like that. Tiffany, I think I want to make a stronger commitment to contemplation. I am also someone who's not very good at staying still. Great. Take those walks, Tiffany, those contemplative walks. Um, Barb says all children need to feel loved and safe. Okay, Mom, not sure I've included anything about that specifically in this little ecological peace building, but as I just said with my story, things branch out. And I think, obviously, in terms of ecological peace building, we are trying to make a world where children can be loved and saved because, you know, when we're caring for the earth, when we're in relationship to the earth, then that means less forced migration. That means less food scarcity, all of those kinds of things that will affect children. It's all connected. So I've got three ways that you can make a difference. Hopefully one of them speaks to you. If not, just keep thinking on your own. And stay in touch. We'll get to that at the end, how you can stay in touch. Um, okay. The first one, climate victory gardens. I think a lot of people know that during World War II in the US and the UK, victory gardens were a big thing. People turned their yards into food gardens so that they would have enough food to stay alive. This is a little bit similar. Um, a lot of times people say, go vegan. That's one of the answers to the ecological crisis. Go vegan. I'm not saying don't go vegan. I think it's very beneficial to cut back on meat, but that's just a simple solution to a much bigger problem because the food system overall contributes so much waste, so many emissions. I mean, if you go to the supermarket, you're looking at all of that plastic that's being tossed away, but there's no way. It's just being put in a landfill that you don't see, but it's still there. So that's one problem. And then the emissions that go into the greenhouse gases driving that heat up. So if you're growing your own food, that means you're reducing emissions used on food transportation, whether it's across countries or across oceans. You're decreasing that plastic use, cutting down on chemicals and pesticides. That's also very important. And personally, it can save you money. It improves your mental health. And this can be a way to increase relationships and community. It's a great thing to do with kids. Probably it should be your own kids or ones that are related to you, or at least, you know, bring their families along. Otherwise, it might be a little weird. But community gardens, big, uh, are quite popular, and there's many ways you can check on the internet for how to start those. Um, Also, say you live in an apartment building, roofs, great place to have gardens, and it's a good way to build micro communities within your building, is to go around and ask people, what do you think if we put a garden on the roof? Would you be interested? Would you like to participate in that with me? Um, so greenamerica.org ha has a section on climate victory gardens. If you want to get involved in that, I recommend going there. To check out how you can make even the smallest balcony into a place where you can grow at least some food for your family. Now, here's another easy one, no mow May. And this might surprise some people, particularly you, Barb, Mom. The world won't end if you stop mowing your lawn for a month. It really won't. Now, addition to the time and or money you'll save by not mowing your lawn in May or November for those in the Southern Hemisphere, though no mow November does not have the same ring. If you're not mowing your lawn in the spring, even if you just do it for a few weeks, you can really help the bee population because spring is when newly emerging native bees are seeking out that pollen and nectar that they need to survive and to thrive. So generally, the longer you go without mowing, or if you keep just a small section of your lawn unmown for the entire year, it can have a huge impact on biodiversity. According to beecityusa.org, which is where you can find more information about this idea, if 10% of the lawns in the US were replaced with pollinator-friendly native plants, ah, sorry, 10% of lawns in the US were replaced with pollinator-friendly native plants, we would add 4 million acres of pollinator habitat. So this is kind of a way to try out the whole concept of rewilding your lawn. Because who knows, you might like see the flowers that come up in your lawn and be like, oh, yeah, actually, that's really pretty. I like this. Or I like having the bees buzzing around. I like the birds that are now more apparent coming to hang out. Um, it's also a good way to start a conversation, I think, to talk to your neighbors. Oh, yeah, this is why I'm not mowing my lawn. Have you thought about the fact that the bees then, lead to more plants, which leads to less carbon in the air, which, you know, reduces emissions. And you just don't think about the fact that these very tiny actions actually can help. And then you get that neighbor on board, and then maybe your other neighbors are like, oh, why are you guys not mowing your lawn? Or this is also something you can do with, say, your, if you're part of a faith community, they have a building. Hey, why don't we not mow our lawn for a month? And then you can share with that faith community while you're doing it. This is part of our ecological care, ecological peace building, because we're restoring habitats for pollinators, and from there it grows and helps the climate overall. Remember, community, inviting people into the community, always helpful. Now, the third one, Michelle, hopefully you will like this one. Pick up a needle and thread because fashion and textiles account for 6.8% or 6 to 8% of global greenhouse emissions, 9% of the annual microplastics dumped in the oceans, and generates 2 to 3 billion tons of waste. And yeah, it is waste. Most of it, we think like, okay, I'm taking this into one of those Goodwill recycling bins or one of the stores that accepts clothes for recycling. And oh, it's all okay. But actually, so much of our clothing gets shipped over to Africa. And a lot of our mindset is, oh, of course, they need clothes in Africa. But that in addition to them actually being flooded, I'm thinking specifically places like Ghana is where a lot of our clothes go. The market's saturated, and the clothes that we send are such poor quality that they're not getting reworn. Reworn. You can see pictures of beaches in Ghana that are just covered with the waste of clothing from Western countries. So that's why I'm saying if you've got a piece of clothing that has a hole in it, tear, and you're thinking, oh, I should just get rid of it. Someone else will take care of it. There's no way. How about instead you try visible mending? A lot of times it's too difficult, especially for cheaper, fast fashion type items, to do invisible mending, or we don't have the skills to do it anymore. But visible mending, I think it looks pretty cool. Look at that picture. I would absolutely wear those jeans. Um, but it's also it's a small act of rebellion to say I'm not going to buy another trendy item or fast fashion item. I am going to be able to go out there proudly with these patches on my pants or embroidery on my shirt. Conversation starter. Can tell people why your clothes look like that. Oh, the fashion industry uses 215 trillion liters of water. That's another number that's fathomable. Talk to people about that. Or another way to build communities, those Stitch and Bitch knitting groups. Why not a Stitch and Bitch visible mending group? Fun time, end up with something that's new to you. You can even swap the clothes and then mend them. All kinds of new ideas. So those are the three ideas I'm putting out there. Um, Hopefully something caught your eye or just generally sparked your interest to think about what am I into? How can I do something that makes a visible interest that I see that keeps my hope alive? Now, I'd like to end this way as we leave here tonight. Remember God's promise to renew everything, the promise that's revealed anew in Jesus, one that dwells in us through the Spirit. We hear it in all whispers of creation. God's promise that everything will be renewed. Remember that that's not an invitation just to check out, to leave all the work to God, but it's a reminder that God's ultimate act of loving restoration of all creation has not been completed yet. And we, the communal we, are all invited to participate in that restoration. So, for Christians to fully embrace ecological peace building, I think we either need to rework a lot of the stories we've been told or re-remember what we may have forgotten. That creation care, social justice, and sharing the story of God coming down in Jesus, the love, the dwelling within us. These are all interconnected and they are all part of God's overarching purpose, God's shalom, God's promise of a vibrant, thriving community where all can flourish. Keep that hope alive. And if you want to stay in touch, I, like half of the world, have a Substack. Please subscribe. I will be talking a lot about ecological peace building there, as well as on my Instagram. And we have the Graceful Punks Book Club. We've got one coming up on Saturday where I, at least, am going to talk about microactivism. Also, a book called a book about craftivism that ties into things you can do for ecological peace building. And then next month, the last Saturday of May, is our ecological peace building theme, where we read books about the environment and share what we've learned. So those are the links of where you can find me or find us in the Graceful Punks Book Club. And in terms of Peace Catalyst, here are ways you can connect with us. And I'm I think that that's all. I thank everyone for being here, for listening, for participating in the chat, and I hope that we can continue to connect. And I hope I've inspired a little spark of you for ecological peace building. I'll be around for a few more minutes if you want to chat or have any questions, but I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off, so don't be afraid to participate. Thanks again.